And thanks to everyone for joining us today. I hope you're doing well and enjoying the waning days of summer. We'd like to extend a special welcome to all the members of ADL leadership and ADL frontline donors who are joining us here today. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Garry Kasparov to Fighting Hate from Home, who will be in conversation with ADL CEO and National Director Jonathan Greenblatt. Garry is a tireless advocate for individual liberty and civic engagement as the founder of the Renew Democracy Initiative, RDI, and chairman of the Human Rights Foundation and the 2000 recipient of ADL's International Leadership Award. We will additionally be joined by Noor Greene, RDI's Director of Strategy and Operations and an expert on human rights, whose work is informed by her own experience growing up in Iraq under Saddam Hussein. On today's call, Jonathan, Garry, and Noor will examine the disruption of democracy that we are facing, the hazard it presents for Jews and other vulnerable communities, and what role each of us can play in defending democracy. To get us started, I'm pleased to turn things over to Jonathan Greenblatt. Jonathan?
Thank you so much, Deb, for that nice introduction. I appreciate it. I want to welcome everyone who's on the line today. And this is really going to be a treat, and it's timely, because we're having this conversation today about democracy in America because we believe that it's at great risk. And this is not just our view, it's the consensus view of many top academic, government, and civil society experts. It's a bipartisan crisis with serious implications, I would say, for the Jewish community and for the country as a whole. And I think this discussion today is going to underscore for all of you why ADL has prioritized protecting democracy and the important work of our partner, the Renew Democracy Initiative, and we'll more about them in just a moment. I do believe that our efforts to harness our capabilities and expertise to protect representative democracy here in America may ultimately be one of the most important initiatives that ADL undertakes in its long and storied history. You know, as an organization with a mission statement that hasn't changed in 109 years, that it's, quote, to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all, ADL has long understood that representative democracy is essential for a healthy and pluralistic society. We need a government system built on free and fair elections, the rule of law, checks and balances, judicial independence, a free press, and the robust protection of civil rights and civil liberties in order to ensure, again, that there should be justice and fair treatment for all people, regardless of how they pray or where they're from or who they love. So what are the signs that democracy is in jeopardy? Well, literally speaking to you less than 24 hours after the Wyoming primary, I think it should be obvious, but let me just recount a few of the items that are concerning to us. Number one, the level of polarization in this country has reached an unprecedented level that, again, experts have likened to the kind of conditions that predates civil war in many societies. The kind of extremism that was once on the fringes of our country has now been mainstreamed. It's been normalized, so it's showing up more places, and it's been localized. So you're seeing extremists pop up in places, get involved in politics, start to try to penetrate different spheres of public life. The unregulated growth of social media has been both symptomatic and causal, in as much as it's allowed these people to organize and enable this content to spread and scale more widely and more rapidly than we've ever seen. Political violence is surging, and polls indicate that people on both sides think violence is okay. And the vitriol that often precedes violence is spiraling. Just look at the reactions in the public sphere over the last week after the raid in Mar-a-Lago, right? Defund the FBI or destroy the FBI. And think about the reactions we've had in the last few years. Defund the police, right? Or end prison sentences and so on and so forth. Voter suppression laws in some 20 different states, threats against election workers, and the dismantling of nonpartisan or bipartisan election administrations. All of this ostensibly in order to stop the steal, which is a preposterous thing. But ultimately, these are steps that endanger the free and fair elections, which are the bedrock of democratic societies. And then finally, look, trust in institutions, government, education system, the media, civil society organizations like ADL and many others. It's extraordinarily low, at historic lows in some regards. And I believe that challenges our ability to agree on shared facts, to develop common practices, and to ultimately deliver on a shared vision for our democracy. So we're making protecting democracy a priority here at ADL, because at this moment, I believe our primary area of expertise represents some of the most, say, virulent accelerants that threaten our democracy. Anti-Semitism and hate, domestic extremism, online dynamics like cyber hate and harassment. All of these forces corrode the systems which bind together our shared society. And in particular, I would highlight anti-Semitism, which we know is the proverbial canary in the coal mine. All these signals are showing us that it's reached record levels in America, and that is a red flashing light for democracy. So I believe that being rooted in the Jewish community, we add a uniquely Jewish perspective to this work. I think that our voice continues to be an important one in promoting voting rights and speaking out against bias-motivated violence, regardless of the victim, in advocating for church-state separation as well as religious freedom. And yet I think we also understand that we do this work not just because it affects Jews, but because our theory is that it affects everyone. And if the Jewish people aren't free, then no one can be free. So our work on behalf of all minorities, all endangered communities, compels us to give this focus. And with that being said, with that context in mind, what a gift it is today to have with us a person of global acclaim, a human rights hero, and an individual who throughout his extraordinary career has combined excellence in his field with a willingness to challenge the status quo and to speak out on behalf of justice and fair treatment to all. And that is my friend and our guest today, Garry Kasparov. Garry, thank you so much for joining us. There he is.
Yeah, Jonathan, thank you very much for your very kind words, and my thanks for ADL for organizing this event. It's really very important that we all get together to debate these issues. While you were speaking, just with one eye, I was looking at the questions and all just reflecting what had been said. And to begin with, I'd like to say a few words about RDI.
Please do. I think, RDI, in my opinion, it's one of the most important new organizations on the horizon. Its commitment to nonpartisanship is renowned and so rare these days. Tell us about RDI, Garry, how you got involved with it and what it's doing.
I got involved by creating it. Yes.
Yeah, it's you, I know.
Yes, by coming up with the idea in February 2017. Guess why? So after these elections, very polarized elections, I was really worried because from my personal background, I could smell the danger of this polarization. And I could see how one extreme was fighting another, because extremes always feed on another extreme. I'm a good scholar of history, and contrary to popular belief, I knew that Adolf Hitler never won outright majority in Germany. The best result Nazi Party had in 1932 elections in November was just over 37%. But at the same time, communists made nearly 16%, which meant that more than half of German voters rejected democracy and looked for iron fist, whether from one extreme or another. And in February 2017, I got some of my friends from both sides, the intellectual conservatives like Bret Stephens, I call them refugees from the Wall Street Journal, and some moderate Democrats from New York. And we just, thought, why not getting together and coming up with a manifesto reflecting these dangers of polarization and populist solutions offered by far right or far left. Eventually, our efforts produced a manifesto that has been signed by 120 plus prominent individuals of both sides of the Atlantic from all political walks of life. But it was still a club. It was not an organization that, though it was 501c3, but that had very active agenda. We also had a book, Fight for Liberty, Defending Democracy in the Age of Trump, that was released in October 2018. But the real history of RDI began with my decision to hire a first executive. I took my chance by hiring a very young, ambitious entrepreneur, Euro Epstein. He was just 26 at the time. And that was the start. Then for the next 3 years, working with Uriel and new members of the board. So we create an organization that already played a certain role by addressing issues from non-partisan stand, which was very rare in America. And the board of RDI began to look very representative. Today, it includes 2 former Democratic senators, Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota and Bob Kerrey of Nebraska. On the other side, I can mention Michael Steele, the former head of RNC, and Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Windman, the former popular world champion, and Andy Duke, among others. But we all are just united by our concern about the future of American democracy. And speaking about American democracy, we do understand that it will affect not just Americans, not just neighboring countries, but the whole world. And the flagship program of RDI last year was named Front Lines of Freedom. And the idea was to bring dissidents, people like myself, people who learned about the tragic consequences of dictatorships and had the personal experience of living under totalitarian regimes, theocratic regimes, authoritarian ideologies, to tell Americans that democracy was worth fighting for. And it's like to have a wake-up call. Yeah. Because so many people in this country took democracy for granted. And I cannot blame them because you grew up in this country. Yeah. Your fathers, your grandfathers, your forebears. It's like, it's there and it cannot disappear. It actually can happen here. It's the prophetic book of Tinker Lewis in I think 1935. That's actually indicated it can happen here.
I think that sounds like a great book to write, that it could happen here. Someone should write that book.
Yeah, but look, I wrote also a book, Winter is Coming, in 2015, when I talked about geopolitical danger of the rising authoritarians with Vladimir Putin as a spearhead of their attacks against a global freedom. But the real moment for RDI began with the last phase of invasion of Putin's armies on Ukraine, February 24th this year. Because that was the moment where everybody recognized, probably not everybody, but it became apparent that it was not just a war against a sovereign state that wanted to be independent from Russian influence. It's a war on the world order. It's now front line of the never-ending war between freedom and tyranny. And the RDI immediately got into it. And we have been working tirelessly, raising money. We raised already millions and millions of dollars to support Ukraine. And one of the key elements is to promote the narrative, just to tell people that this war is not Ukrainian war, it's not even the European war, it's our war. And if, God forbid, Putin succeeds, even partially in Ukraine, it will affect our democracy in America as well. And it's not surprising that so many Trumpists, they turn blind eye or even being supportive of Putin's actions, finding some sort of excuses for his brutalities. So I believe that now we're at a point where you cannot separate American democracy from the rest of the world. It's the globalization. And if democracy gets weaker elsewhere, it affects America. And if we win our battle here, it helps other freedom fighters around the globe.
So I got to ask, why do you think we're seeing this potential recession in democracy? Because let's be honest, right? We just had we had Viktor Orban here We've seen Bolsonaro, we've seen Erdogan, of course, we've seen Putin, we've seen Xi. So like, why is it that suddenly it seems like democracy is sort of on the back foot, Garry, on the defense?
Look, I think that it's a long story, and it's a sad story as of now, but I believe in happy ending because I believe democracy prevails, freedom wins, because that's the only way to move forward. But we should probably go back now to the end of the Cold War. Why America and the free world has won convincingly the Cold War? Because we had ideas, we had values, we knew what we were fighting for, and we had our vision of the future. What's happened after we won the Cold War? We got relaxed. So we forgot that evil never dies. It could be buried for years, maybe for a decade, under the rubble of Berlin Wall. But eventually, the moment we turn complacent, it sprouts up. And I think that's the crisis of this moment is due to the fact that we are moving from one stage of human history to another, one chapter to another. It's like, it's always happened in history. You have, pre-industrial era and then industrialization and then post-industrialization. Now we probably go to a post-industrialization. But any shift in these socioeconomic arrangements always created conflict. You have many people who are doing great and even more people who are left behind. And it's this crisis is always an opportunity for demagogues, whether they come from the left, mourning the socialism that somehow had to be tried again, or from the right, talking about the cult of personality and about iron fists that could actually help ordinary people, the God-fearing fox, to be treated as they deserve. So we are at this point where, unless we have a plan, we have a vision for the future, unless we make the mainstream politics exciting again by rallying people for the vision. We always need a vision. Remember 1962, Rice University, John F. Kennedy talking about landing on the moon and saying that just we have to do these things and the other things in this decade, not because it's easy, but because it's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, today, any politician who promises you difficulties will be run out of town. So,
well, it's funny. I have so many questions, but I'd like to pull in our other speaker, if I might. I want to pull in Noor Greene. Noor Greene is a human rights activist who works with the Renew Democracy Initiative, RDI. And Noor is going to join us for this conversation, having grown up in Iraq and lived in this community. I think she's got a really interesting perspective. So Noor, as you look at these developments, having seen what you've seen in the Middle East, how would you posit we're doing today in the US? Oh, Noor, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah. So I was born in Iraq during the late 80s. I've got 2 years of the Iran-Iraq war. And then after that, my first memories were of Desert Storm. And then after that, I lived under a socialist country. Iraq was close to the outside. I kind of was told what to think, lived every day of my life, under socialism. After the war, we got a glimpse of freedom, which was wonderful, but it was, utter and uncontrolled freedom, which came at the expense of safety. As you could have seen, Iraq was controlled heavily by militias. And I think at some point we kind of lost our identity. It was very hard to understand what did it mean to be Iraqi anymore. And I feel like looking at the US in current days, in terms of what symbolizes America, I feel like we're kind of losing that, perspective on what does it mean to be American anymore. And you got the right who wants to claim, the far right wants to claim American symbolism. The far left gets too scared about associating with specific aspects of it. And we're kind of losing this perspective on that this country is amazing. We have our problems, we have our, differences, some of them are very extreme and so on, but we have been losing sight of that. Right. Although America has problems, it's still a lot better than what's out there. And I think what RDI is doing with the network of dissidents, of the people who keep coming here and keep telling the story of, no, we have problems, but this could be a lot worse. Like outside of America, things can be a lot worse. So as we kind of address these issues, we need to understand that although the US is going through some crisis, it's still a great democracy, and it still needs to be replicated elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think people like us who come to this country, and I am a director of strategy and operations at the Renew Democracy Initiative, which is an amazing organization. And that was granted to me by American freedoms and ideals. I don't know what I would have been had I stayed in Iraq. And I think that's something that people, lose sight of.
Well, I think your experience of growing up in Ba'athist Iraq, and your experience, Garry, growing up in the Communist Soviet Union is so important, because Americans just don't know this. But one of the things I think is very interesting is, Garry, I have likened the threats from the extreme right as being like a hurricane, a Category 5 hurricane, and the extreme left as like climate change. It happens more slowly, and it's changing, and then boom. So you've also used an interesting analogy, like the right is like a heart attack, or the left is like cancer. Could you share that with all of us? I think people would benefit from hearing your perspective.
Yeah. By the way, so yeah, I also had experience living in Putin's Russia. So for me, it's some kind of double jeopardy. I grew up in the Soviet Union. I saw the collapse of the Soviet Empire and communism, the end of the Cold War, the triumph of the free world, and we all believed in the bright future. And not surprisingly, the best-selling book of 1992 was The End of History by Francis Fukuyama. And 9 years later, after the triumphant days of August 91 in Moscow, so we ended up with KGB Lieutenant Colonel as the new president of Russia. The man who publicly said many times that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, and started his presidency with reintroducing Soviet anthem. Yeah, it's the so for me it was just the darkness in my early days, and then years of hope, and then Putin's dictatorship, and I did everything I could to fight back. Maybe it was not enough. Yeah, I knew that it was uphill battle, and then I ended up living in America. So it's this. Yes, I had my dream of my kids living and growing and starting in a free country, but this country is America now. So, but I still hope that we will come back one day, maybe even sooner than many people think, because this war is definitely weakening Putin. But going back to the question, it's you can look at both sides, both extremes in America, and you can say that one is infected. It's a virus of ideology, while on the other side we have a cult of personality. So this is basically two cults, and there's no room for people. There's no room for individuals. There's no room for freedom, because on the left you have a dogma, and you must stay with this dogma. And by the way, again, I'm reading the questions, and yes, we are not going to overlook the anti-Semitism on the left. It's also a result of a dogma, because of this anti-Semitism is very much based on the rejection of the state of Israel, and somehow the love for the liberation, this of Palestine, all these many terrorist organizations that grew up very much with the support, not just Soviet Union, but also democracy, especially Western European democracy. But on the right, you have, that's why it says heart attack, because it's an immediate danger. Cancer may kill you in 10, 20 years. We have medicine now to slow it down, though it's still eating your body. But this is a heart attack. You have the promoters of big lies. You just talked about Wyoming, the latest example, and we all knew the outcome of Wyoming was predictable. Where you didn't have to be sort of Nostradamus to actually to say that Liz Cheney was on the way to massive electoral defeat. But it's across the country. The Republican primaries bring in pro-Trump candidates who are winning these primaries by denying the result of elections and basically praising Trump for what he does. I think it's a great shame for one's great party, that's Grand Old Party, part of Lincoln and Reagan to run for the defense of Donald Trump after the FBI carried the search in Mar-a-Lago, even without looking at a warrant, even without understanding the consequence for national security. It's amazing. The party once stood for law and order, and was full of the Cold War warriors. Just probably the last of them was late John McCain. That probably would be terrified by the behavior of people who now claim to be their successors.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so difficult now to find the right balance. So where do you go? And we believe the only way is to bring people to the center and to find find the right move at this point. And I believe now, again, with all my denunciation of the far left ideology and the damage they're doing to American values, I think the biggest danger comes from the right these days, because it's an immediate threat to the most important function of democracy, a peaceful transit of power. And that's, just talking about Ukraine, just one more point. When people ask me what was the difference between Ukraine and Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I always say that our past, and unfortunately I was on the Russian side, moved in the opposite directions with Ukraine in 1994, where Ukrainian president, first Ukrainian president, Leonid Kravchuk, lost elections to Leonid Kuchma, pro-Russian candidate, and walked away. It was a peaceful transfer of power. While in Russia, Boris Yeltsin, who was very unpopular at the time, decided to move with the war in Chechnya as the best and old hope to resurface as a popular politician. And somehow, it helped his successor, Vladimir Putin, who launched second Chechen war, to become a hero in the eyes of many Russians. So anything that threatens this very sensitive mechanism, the peaceful transfer of power, so it's the greatest threat to American democracy. And I think it's the worst moment since 1800, where there was a stalemate, after the elections, and it's, I don't know, had so many votes in the House. But now it's not just, a vote. Now it's just, it's an outright denial of something that they all knew. I mean, except some crazies, they all know they are selling lies.
Yeah.
And the fact is they're selling lies, and these lies are granting them electoral victories. That's frightening.
Well, look, we got so many questions in the chat, but I want to ask one more just to get into this. Again, I referenced both of your kind of growing up, you in the Soviet Union, Garry, which was so inhospitable, to religion and to ethnic minorities. And Noor, you growing up in Iraq, where again, I think it was very inhospitable, I think as well, to minorities. And we believe in ADL that hate corrodes democracy, that intolerance weakens societies. Maybe starting with you, Noor, and then to you, Garry, talk about the role that you saw in your own experience when you were growing up in Iraq, the role that hate might have had on you and the society.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, again, I said it was a closed country. So the media that we had was pretty controlled. So I grew up, learning about hating specific countries and specific religious minorities. And to me, that was normal. Like, I look back at the person I was, and it's kind of crazy to think that I thought those things and I thought I was a good person thinking them. So, the effect of tyranny and dictatorship and, this kind of like brainwashing in multiple ways, like, can actually change people, from good people and make them do things that they wouldn't do if they knew better. So, yeah, I mean, I grew up in a place that, had I stayed or continued, I don't know if I will be the same person I am today. So, yeah, it has a massive effect. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's like, seriously, I look back at who I was and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I thought that. Like, I can't believe that this is something that I thought growing up in Iraq, that this group of people doesn't deserve this, or that this country is bad, or that, we should go to war with this country, or hate these people just because somebody told me, and throughout generations. So, and the possibility of being able to change, I think is a huge point that sometimes people, kind of miss. And when we come here, like as immigrants or dissidents and so on, we're not talking about hypothetical fears. I think people look at the threats to freedom and they think they're hypothetical. I'm not telling you this because I thought about it and I thought, oh, it's probably a bad idea for us to like abandon democracy. I'm telling you that I come from a place where it happened and it was awful. And I think that's what RDI is doing in the process of bringing, dissidents and so on, is that their fears, their stories are not ideals. They're not just, utopians, and they're not hypothetical. They have happened and they could happen again. And I think Ukraine has proved that it could happen to anywhere and to anybody.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Garry, do you want to build on that? You're on mute, Garry. Can we
Yeah. I was also just looking at the questions. Somebody actually doubts my knowledge of American history. I can assure you that I'm a good scholar of American history. Trust me. So it's unless you're a professor, that's you'll be hard to compete in knowing the details of history of America and the free world. So look, as I mentioned already, Frontline of Freedom was our flagship project because I think it's very important for this polarized environment to have voices like Noor's voice. It's virtually impossible to attack. We have activists from Xinjiang region, Uyghurs, suffer from genocide. We have activists from Africa. This is one of the also employees now of RDI is Pastor Ivan Mavariri from Zimbabwe. It's a great man, one of the most eloquent speakers I ever heard. Spent years in the prison there for fighting against Mugabe's dictatorship. So when you have these people coming from these most oppressive countries, or Masih Alinejad from Iran, or Leopoldo Lopez from Venezuela, and they tell their stories, and they tell Americans that the American democracy is still, the beacon of hope for millions and millions of people around the world. Look, whether you come from the right or the left, it's very difficult to fight back because we have no political agenda. I live in America. My kid's born in the United States, but I live on a green card. So that's the and while I feel, strongly, justice for American democracy, and that's why I always say our democracy. But I've no, stake in the game. I'm not running. So that's why, I believe my words, they carry more power because I have no political agenda for them. I care about Ukraine. I care about freedom around the world. I care, of course, about Russia. And I believe, that's beating Putin on the battlefield in Ukraine could lead to liberation of Ukraine and also liberation of Russia from Putin's fascism. But at the end of the day, it's very important that Americans learn from our experience and secure American democracy as the foundation for global freedom.
Great. Deb, there's a lot to talk about here. Do you want to open it up to questions from the audience?
Absolutely. We've gotten quite a few. So to start us off, I'll group these into a little bit of some themes that we're seeing sort of play out here. And so the first of them is social media. We've gotten lots of questions about the spread of hate and disinformation and conspiracy theories online. What can be done to meaningfully reduce this extremism and hate online? And what can the average person at home do to help? John,
I can answer that, but maybe we should go to Garry first or Noor.
I'm afraid there's no easy solution, if there's a solution at all, because we want people to have access to information. I came from a country where we had no access to information. Every bit of information was so valuable. We had to go through these Janta radio programs, collect some books on the black market. And now we discovered that outright freedom could be also dangerous because it offers opportunities for negative use, for those who are promoting hatred. I think simply banning everybody, it's not a perfect solution, because someone has to come up with a criteria as an objective, and we don't see this objectivity. While I uploaded Twitter decision to ban Donald Trump, but I don't understand how this platform that was so resolute by going after Trump and his followers still allows Iranian mullahs and other terrorists to operate. There's still accounts that praise attack on Salman Rushdie, and nothing happens. So that's why I'm very skeptical that we can have unified position on banning people there. So maybe we can have to come up with some new laws. But again, this is something that all these big corporations, actually a couple of questions already addressed it. So whether we can force them to release their rules on banning people or editorial policies, because otherwise, it still lives in the hands of a few. And even if we respect them, they have their own political agenda. And so unfortunately, I think it's the only way is basically to fight back and to tell people that there are values. There's a good and bad. You can't simply eliminate all these religious or ideological, politically motivated garbage from internet without hurting the freedom of expression.
Look, I think Facebook, for example, is the most innovative company, arguably in the history of business, certainly one of them. It earns $100 billion a year in revenue. It has 3 billion users in like less than 20 years. If they applied the level of energy that they're applying to solving the metaverse, to tackling hate on the platform, this could be addressed. And to Gary's point, like how Twitter can allow Khamenei up there when he's threatening, allow accounts like Putin's up there, when they delegitimize Ukraine, when they demonize individuals, the inconsistency and the hypocrisy is astonishing. So I would really like to see government engage and force these companies. If they don't, apply, I mean, look, freedom of speech is not the freedom to slander people. And freedom of expression is not the freedom to incite violence against minorities. Nor to call to destroy the FBI or to bring harm to other people. This stuff isn't hard. So, and if they don't obey the law, look, cars can't be produced without seatbelts anymore. Cigarettes have to be issued with warning labels on them. It's time to kind of force these companies to label their products, to build in the brakes that can, save consumers' lives. It's more simple than they make it out to be. But to Gary's point, it ain't going to be easy. So we need to push them to do it once and for all.
Thank you both for those answers. So changing directions a little bit, let's talk about these conspiracy theories and this misinformation that we're seeing. Why do you think that these theories have such a hold on people and that they really take fire the way that they do? Anyone?
I would go to Noor or Gary. I mean,
yeah, Noor, what do you think?
Saddam's Iraq was full of conspiracy theories, right, Noor?
You have a unique perspective.
I mean, I sometimes struggle with this because I feel like what we see online is not everything that is out there. Like as a moderate myself, when I see, a conspiracy theory on one side or the other, I usually tend to not want to engage with it. And I feel sometimes that we think that the people who are commenting are the people who, that's everything out there. And I think we are failing to recognize that there are people out there who are not necessarily engaging, but also not agreeing on these, conspiracy theories. We also have the perspective that the people who engage in these conversations, and I don't have an answer with that, or these conspiracy theories, are somehow disconnected from, they're either they don't have access to social media, or they don't have access to education, and they live somewhere far, and they don't really have any idea of the larger context. But as throughout the last 2 or 3 years, I've started to notice that I have friends online who I've, engaged with for years, engage with these theories, and they're successful people, they have successful education, they run businesses, and I think there is an aspect of alienation that we're somehow alienating these people. And I think unless we kind of come to the middle again, what they're essentially engaging in is a form of tribalism. So they're sacrificing, their general ideals because they want to get this thing. That's like, making them feel like they're losing their identity, or that somebody is trying to erase them, and so on. So I think most of it is really that. It is tribalism, is that I look at this and this is not me, I wouldn't do this, but somehow it's desperate times and I must do it. And we're working on the solution for this, but I think coming to the middle, bringing people from these far, sides to the middle, and, again, recognizing what is American, what makes them American, again, because I feel like one side is too ashamed to be American and one side is claiming that they're the Americans and nobody else is. And, and there are these people who are, being polarized to one side or another, according to like what they feel their tribe, wants at the moment.
That's a fantastic answer. Oh, Gary,
I
please.
can just add one more thing, there's so many reports illustrated that fake news, they have much more attraction to people's eyes. It's something like 70-30 because of its sensationalism. People are just, they tend to look for something that they didn't know and something that sounds mind-boggling. So this element always wins the competition, something new, something that I never heard of. And that's another obstacle. Again, statistically, it's proven, just time and again, that fake news, unfortunately, they are running way ahead of truth online.
Yep, that certainly seems to be the case. Jonathan, anything to add?
No, I think they covered it. I mean, I think one of the questions that actually I think one of the ways we need to deal with this, and so maybe this is a question for you, Gary, or for you, Noor, is like to diffuse this polarization where you have two sides that are at odds. Do we need to change the dynamic in the American kind of body politic? Like, what do you think of Andrew Yang's Forward Party or the No Labels movement? Like, is this what we'll take, or what would you recommend, Gary, as a kind of a scholar of this, how would you recommend we diffuse that polarization?
I think that's a Gary question.
Thank you, Noor. Look, Americans, they have strong resentment against the third party because everything they knew about the third party was, being a spoiler. So every time you looked at the American elections, you found that the third party, the third candidate helped one of the big parties winning. And you can come up, with many examples. Just to let you know about my knowledge of American history, I think one of the cases was in 1844, where a small anti-war party in New York basically denied Vick's victory, and Polk won by a very, very, very small margin. So you can check it. So naturally, we can talk about two big cases. In 1912, when former President Teddy Roosevelt run and basically, just granted presidency to Democrats, to Wilson, and in 1992, when Ross Perot most likely secured victory for Bill Clinton. But there's something that people often overlook by analyzing the third-party performance. And I didn't talk about Ralph Nader in 2000 or Anderson in 1980. So again, many other cases, or I'm not sure whether it had decisive effect, or Wallace run in 1968. So when you look at even at the most important third-party runs, and obviously it was 1912 and 1992, the two major parties had mainstream centrist candidates, not radicals. In 1912, it was Woodrow Wilson, not James Bryan, just but Wilson, who looked far more acceptable to many Republicans at the time. In 1992, it was the choice was between Bush and Clinton. Now, if the choice would be between, let's say, Buchanan and Dukakis, I'm not so sure Perot would be doing it. So that's why if we're now looking for 2024 or for other elections, having far left candidates, Trumpists on one side and Bernie Sanders sisters on the other side, then I think the chances for the third party, for the third candidate, they could become more realistic. Again, it doesn't happen overnight. You need a strong candidate. I don't think Andrew Yang and the fourth party, they are just hitting the right buttons. But I think it's very important that we will see more attempts, not just to be a spoiler. Naturally, Liz Cheney, it's from what she said, you can just draw only one conclusion. She will do absolutely everything to defend democracy and prevent Donald Trump from winning elections again, which means she could run on the Republican primaries and then independent run, stealing votes from Trump. But that's about spoiling chances of a would-be dictator. But we yet to see the momentum for the party that will, try to bring together the center. And I think the center is pretty big. It's just all, Andrew Yang actually pointed out of the statistics. I'm not sure that he and others that joined him, and I think it's most of them are Republicans, former Republicans. So they created a coalition that yet can attract American voters.
All right, get back to you.
All right. Thank you for that. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the strategies to combat and reverse the undermining of our democracy? And what can people do to support that? And how can they become involved in the process? What do you think? Jonathan, you want to start on that one?
Well, I think there are a few things that we think are essential. So number one, I think ensuring free and fair elections are crucial. So resisting those who try to suppress the vote, pushing back on those who would gerrymander and create sort of fake districts in order to engineer a political outcome, and making sure that the people who vote make voting as broadly as accessible as possible, not just mail-in balloting, but I would have voting more than one day a week for sure. People who work, can't really show up to vote on a Tuesday. It's not so easy. And I also think that make sure that people who do vote and the election commissioners and whatnot are not harassed, bullied, and victimized. So I would look at some of the nuts and bolts of voting, making it more accessible, protecting the people who administer it, and preventing those who would change the laws through gerrymandering or voter suppression to make it harder to vote.
Thank you for that. Garry, Noor, something to add?
I can go a little bit for what we're doing in RDI. Most of what I do is kind of trying to help and to help the public understand what losing democracy means. This is why we have the Front Lines of Freedom, our dissidents projects. So I think educating people in the sense of that, what could happen if we lose the rights that we currently have in the US is something that, RDI is contributing, to, and it's something that I'm really passionate about, considering that, I lived in a place where, you could vote by sending your cousin to vote for you, or, and then you get Saddam, because there's only one person you can vote for. So I think paying attention to what's happening outside in countries where democracy is not, reigning is something that I hope the media can pay attention to beyond, simply highlighting events that generate clicks. Thank you for that.
All right, we are running short on time, but I think we have time for a couple more. So let's see, maybe you can speak a little bit to the challenges of preserving democracy in a pluralistic society and how that's different from the societies in which you both grew up in.
I think to value democracy, you have to grow up in a country without it, or have it and lose it. So that's why our experience is quite unique. So, and as I said, I had this experience twice. So that's why I'm watching with great concern what's happening, not just in America, but on the other side of the Atlantic. Many European countries, they're going through this, through the same political algorithm. You could see more and more people, turning to far right or far left. Yeah, look at France, the latest presidential elections. Yes, won by President Macron, but in the first round, 55% of French voters supported openly pro-Putin candidates during the war. So that gives you an indication about the mood of the electorate. Yes, the second ballot was won by Macron fairly comfortably, but still, it's an indication. And you look at other countries, let's say Germany. You have in some German lands, you already had an experience of far right, far left coalition winning majority of the votes. The Linke on the left and AfD on the right. So it's still very challenging. Italy is also always a problem. So Greece, obviously Hungary. In Hungary, we have it's an almost modern type dictatorship, and Hungary is a member of European Union. So it's worth recognizing that you better be active now before it's too late. And I think a lot of things can be done because sending clear message in November that anybody, no matter what he or she says about economy or politics, anybody who is denying the outcome of 2020 election, anybody who's spreading big lie, anybody who is preaching only to Donald Trump must be turned down by the voters. That's the chance that the whole system will start, recuperating from the extremist influence.
Thank you for that. Noor, anything you'd like to add?
I think Garry covered that. But again, going back to, I think sometimes we like to think the problem is big, and simplifying it by saying we don't like these people or we don't like these people, and therefore we going into like either attack mode. But there is a reality that we have to face, that a big percentage of the people are being polarized, and attacking them is unfortunately alone not solving the problem. So I think recognizing that there are reasons as to why these people are acting in that way, and getting to the bottom of what do they even get there in the first place is something that needs to be addressed at some point. And this is what I mean by we kind of somehow lost our perspective of what it means to be American. And I think bringing them back to like, no, we are Americans and we're not right or left.
Thank you for that. So we're about out of time. So Jonathan, just before we go, I'm going to ask you one more question. If there's one thing that we can be hopeful for, what is it? I gave you an easy one. You're on mute though.
I think we can be hopeful for the fact that America is literally, I believe in American exceptionalism. I believe this is the most robust and resilient democracy in the history of Western civilization. We've been around for longer, and again, we've overcome global conflict, economic recession, civil war, right? So we have bounced back from hard times. We can do it again. The fact that this is a bipartisan problem creates space because we will develop hopefully bipartisan solutions, and where people from all sides come together to preserve this gift that really is, as Ben Franklin said, a republic. If we can keep it, we got to work at keeping it. Because if we don't work at keeping it, it could happen here.
Thank you for that. I needed a little something before we let all of these people go after this fantastic conversation. I want to thank Noor for being here, and Garry for being here, and Jonathan, and all three of you for the amazing.
Can I just say one other thing? You know what gives me enthusiasm, optimism? Noor and Garry. Like literally that this country can accommodate and embrace and create the space for a grandmaster world chess champion and like a human rights activist from the Middle East and from again, I guess we'd call it very Eastern Europe, to come to this place, to make their own lives and to have extraordinary success. What a blessing America is, and God willing, its best days are still in front of it.
Thank you for that.
Thank
I
you.
want to thank all of our speakers. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This has been recorded and will be sent in a follow-up email, so you can share that. I also want to let you know that ADL's Never Is Now, the world's largest annual summit on anti-Semitism and hate, is going to be back in person this year. Join us on Thursday, November 10th at the Javits Center in New York City. You can go to neverisnow.org for more information and to register. Until then, keep an eye on your inbox and stay well. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.